Chapter 4. Altitude 39,200 feet. Airspeed 548 miles an hour. Flight number BA-126. Thundering westward through the blackness some 7.5 miles above the North Atlantic, the big British Airways jet was exactly on schedule. The silver and blue Boeing 747 had left London 18 minutes late, but skillful flying had closed that gap. Barring unforeseen problems, BA-126 would touch down at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport in 95 minutes. The flight had gone well thus far. There had been no bumpy turbulence, no difficult passengers complaining about the food or getting drunk, no infants wailing while furious adults tried to sleep, no irritatingly amorous travelers trying to seduce the flight attendants, and no heart attacks, diabetic crises, or women going into labor. With nearly 3/4 of the journey over, almost everyone aboard, crew and passengers, was in fairly good spirits. Among the less enthusiastic minority was a greying, patrician-looking man seated up front in the first-class section. First class had been Sir Brian Forsythe's natural habitat and lifestyle long before he became the head of the United Kingdom's mission to the United Nations. The handsome son of a hard-drinking baronet, he knew Britain's elite. He was one of them. Like the custom-made clothes he wore, his credentials were impeccable. He'd won the Latin Medal at Harrow, a distinguished flying cross in the Royal Air Force, and an honours degree in history from Trinity College, Cambridge. His intelligence and old boy connections weren't the only reasons that he'd later risen swiftly in the Foreign Office. Beneath that elegant manner and upper-class accent, Forsythe had the toughness and practicality of a street fighter. A man of high principle and no illusions, he'd developed into one of the most effective diplomats serving Her Majesty's government today. HMG, the concise usage of generations of British civil servants, usually sent Forsythe where the trouble was. He had never hesitated or resisted. A gentleman did his duty, and did it well. That was the Forsythe Code. It had been since the 12th century. He had survived riots in Tehran, an assassination attempt in Cairo, 3 years of ugly futility in Saigon, Washington's steamy summers and pushy press corps, malaria in East Africa, and 41 months of terrible food and worse weather in Moscow. Shrewd, patient, hard as steel, and always pleasant, he'd earned the respect of ally and adversary alike, even the wary Russians. After 33 years with the Foreign Office, he knew the game well. But he wasn't sure that he wanted to play it anymore. Someone had changed the game in recent years. It had become vicious and violent, a brutal thing much closer to war than diplomacy. Political murders, terrorist attacks, and naked military aggression were replacing international law almost everywhere. Barely 60 hours ago, bloody fighting had erupted in the Near East again. That was why Sir Brian Forsythe was on BA-126, en route to New York for an emergency session of the UN Security Council. Another orgy of riotous oratory, he thought, as he refocused on the speech he was holding. When he reached the last paragraph, he took out his fountain pen, paused, struck out a phrase, and wrote 2 words above it. Then he finished reading and sighed. "Is something wrong, Ambassador?" the tall woman seated beside him asked anxiously. "Hardly anything. As usual, Miss Jenkins, you've done a splendid job. I'm fortunate to have such an able special assistant." Ellen Jenkins beamed. This soft-spoken woman's expertise in both Soviet and Arab affairs had earned her many commendations during her 15 years with the Foreign Office, but Forsythe's approval was especially important to her. It wasn't because he was her boss and one of Britain's top diplomats. Career considerations were not involved. This was something more elemental. Sir Brian Forsythe, admired at the Foreign Office for his sensitivity in negotiation and grasp of people, had no idea that the wide-eyed woman he worked with nearly every day was in love with him. She had been for almost 2 years. She hadn't admitted it to herself until his wife died 19 months earlier, but deep within her, she had known. She had hidden it from everyone. The Oxford-educated son of a baronet couldn't possibly care for a Welsh butcher's daughter who'd studied at an unimportant red brick university devoid of tradition or status. And there was another gap between them, 18 years. People might smirk and jest about a father fixation, and the fact that she looked even younger than her age would only emphasize the meaninglessness numerical difference. Class, education, and age were not the only reasons that she concealed her feelings. She had her Welsh pride too. There was no way she could tell him. That was unthinkable. It was much safer and wiser simply to acknowledge his compliment about the speech. "That's very kind of you, Sir Brian," she said, and immediately regretted her compulsive modesty. "I'll try to do your text justice," he promised, and drained his champagne glass. "I'd like to go out on a high note." Out? There isn't much time. I'll be 60 in June, and that's the retirement age. 6 months. She had tried so hard not to think about it. When he retired, she'd probably never see him again. Couldn't they make an exception for a valuable senior diplomat? She asked, in as calm a voice as she could muster. "I'm not sure I'd want them to. Don't worry, Miss Jenkins. The chap who takes over may be much better." Unable to stop herself, she shook her head in disagreement. "Oh no, Sir Brian. I appreciate your loyalty, but no one's irreplaceable." She struggled for the courage to tell him. "In any case, HMG has its rules," he continued as a blonde stewardess approached with an opened bottle of champagne. "I've lived by those rules almost half my life." "May I, Sir Brian?" the smiling stewardess asked. He thanked her, and she began to refill his glass. "Now, let's talk about something more interesting," he said. "Stewardess, please tell us about that old lady who attracted so many journalists at Heathrow. Her dreary clothes seemed Russian." "Oh, bullseye, Sir Brian," the pretty flight attendant complimented. "She's 76, I'm told, and she is Russian. Her name is Mrs. Olitsky." Sarah Olitsky is a Jewish widow who has become a cause célèbre for several US politicians and 2 New York City newspapers that detest each other, Ellen Jenkins said crisply. "They've all been trying to get her out to rejoin her only living relatives who are, I believe, residents of Brooklyn." "Ah, the Kiev grandma," Forsythe recalled. "It was on the BBC last night that she'd left Moscow. She must be delighted." "Not entirely," the flight attendant said as she filled Ellen Jenkins' glass with chilled mums. "In point of fact, Mrs. Olitsky is rather distressed about something, but we don't know what it is. She doesn't speak a word of English." Then she paused before she asked the question. "Do you happen to speak Russian, Sir Brian?" "Well now, not as well as Miss Jenkins. She has a remarkable gift for languages. Is it 5 or 6? Embarrassed by his disclosure, Ellen Jenkins unbuckled her seatbelt. "I'd be glad to help if I can," she said, and rose to follow the stewardess. Sarah Olitsky sat 22 rows back, wearing a tired woolen babushka over her hair and an expression of acute tension. When Ellen Jenkins asked in Russian how she was, a torrent of words poured out in urgent reply. It's a human and not a political problem," the Welsh diplomat told the stewardess. "Mrs. Olitsky needs to use the lavatory. I'll show her the way." When they returned to the grey-haired exile's seat a few minutes later, the older woman squeezed Ellen Jenkins' hand and spoke again. "Could you possibly get her a glass of tea? It's the Russian custom," the Welsh woman explained. The Kiev grandma beamed and squeezed Ellen Jenkins' hand once more when the glass of tea arrived. Then the older woman thanked her, sipped the tea, and closed her eyes in contentment. When she opened them, she uttered another burst of Russian, and Ellen Jenkins replied softly. Then she started back with the flight attendant towards the first-class compartment. As they reached it, Ellen Jenkins turned sideways to let a portly stockbroker pass. In doing so, she inadvertently brushed against a well-dressed young man in the aisle seat. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," she said in reflex courtesy. He didn't answer. Clutching a black attaché case with both hands, he scowled at her in open hostility. Ellen Jenkins noticed something else in his eyes as well. It looked like fear. She apologized again, as she had been brought up to do, and continued towards the first-class section with the stewardess. "Did you notice his leather case, Miss Jenkins?" "Yes, why?" "That's what he's so bloody nervous about. Won't let go of it for a second. Even takes it to the loo with him," she confided with a wry giggle. For a few moments, Ellen Jenkins wondered what might be in the attaché case. Then her mind turned, as it did so often, to Sir Brian Forsythe. She felt a sudden tightening in her throat, and it took a strong effort to speak when she sat down beside him 20 seconds later.